Hello, everyone. Excited to be with you today talking about scaling data quality in regulated industries. And my name is Rich Taylor. I do marketing at Anomalo, and we'll just kick it off with introductions. So we'll start with Antoine.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rich. Thanks for having me. So my name is Antoine Amend. I'm the technical director for financial services at Databricks. I've been with the company for about 3 years now as an industry practitioner. So my entire job is as a technologist is to look at bridging the gap between technical capability of the platform to business use cases in financial services. A little bit of Databricks first. So Databricks is the cloud data and AI company, and we provide all the infrastructure, the open source technologies, the frameworks for organizations to unlock value from their data on cloud. And that means all the way from BI and MI type of capabilities to something that is more AI or machine learning type of frameworks. So really glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, excited to have you. All right, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks again, Rich. Good to be here. So Joe Forooghian, I lead Capco's data strategy and advisory business within the UK. That's a team of over 100 data management and data strategy and transformation consultants. As part of Capco, we work in our global data practice. Capco is a global management and technology consultancy, and our data practice has over 800 data practitioners globally. And we work across the full data value chain, so everything from data architecture and engineering through to data management and then to data analytics and AI. So yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And Jeremy.
Yeah, hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here with Antoine and Joe. My name is Jeremy Stanley. I am the CTO and co-founder at Anomalo. Before this, I was actually at Instacart running data science and machine learning there. I met my co-founder Elliot at Instacart, and we founded Anomalo to build a platform that could monitor cloud data warehouses, data lakes for data quality issues, and help companies find out about them before anyone else does, and be able to really have a higher level of trust in their data. I also began my career in financial services. I spent 10 years at EY, so I'm pretty familiar with this space as well. Very excited to be here.
All right, well, we'll get into it. Just, I think we've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but, maybe we can just each talk about what companies and industries you normally work with. Because I think, Antoine, maybe you're the easiest, so you can go first again. What companies and industries do you normally work with? And then we'll go to Joe and then Jeremy again.
Yes, sure. So I think obviously I'm exclusively working for financial services organizations. But even within financial services, there is like this wide spectrum from retail banks and fintechs to asset management community between the buy side and the sell side, the regulators, as well as all insurance, life and P&C insurance. So you see really a wide variety of different type of use cases, different type of approaches, different operating models. So I will not necessarily bucket everything into one specific vertical. It's really many different industries within an industry.
Yeah. Joe, how about Capco? What type of companies are you working with or industries?
Yeah, so Capco is exclusively focused in the financial services industry. So we got our name from working in capital markets. We were known as the capital markets company, but today we work really across the same as Antoine across all the different financial services kind of domains. So predominantly that's cap markets and banking and payments, but we have a very growing insurance sector and also wealth and asset management as well.
Great, Jeremy.
So Anomalo financial services is a big focus for us. We have a number of big customers in the financial services space, companies like Discover and Block. We tend to focus on companies that have a high volume of transactional data in financial services. And so that tends to focus on payments, banking, insurance, more B2C or B2SMB. But Anomalo also has a lot of customers in many other verticals, healthcare, anything connected devices, e-commerce is a really big focus area for us, anything with respect to content and publishing online. So a wide variety of companies.
Great. I think getting into more of the meat of it, but there's a lot of discussion. Marketers came up with the term modern data stack and people moving to that. But I think as the industries we're in, we see a mix of legacy and newer products. I'm curious, where you see companies, which parts of the companies you see investing in kind of new products, or maintaining what they have in place. So Joe, maybe you could start just, where you see people kind of migrating and where you see people kind of staying in place with what they have, and what, maybe why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, when we talk about modern data stack, commonly we're talking about cloud adoption as well. And we're seeing our clients at different stages in their cloud adoption, and cloud migration journey. And we of course see particular investment in platforms like Databricks to enable, analytics and engineering teams to deliver at scale, but importantly in a controlled manner. I think if we focus on data management tooling, and by that I mean data quality, metadata management, data lineage, etc. We see such a wide spectrum of clients across different industries at different places in that cloud adoption journey. Some are going from quite large on-prem data management stacks and moving towards the cloud, and some are actually adopting data management tooling and practices for the first time, particularly in some of the domains that are less mature in that space. I think where we're seeing clouds adopting data management tooling for the first time, and that's usually clients who are on that cloud journey, we are seeing more of a focus on kind of augmented cloud native data catalogs and data quality tooling. Moving away from typical rules-based engines, typical on-prem data catalogs, usually that were delivered as built as some part of a broader data warehouse solution tied to a specific vendor, moving straight to that kind of tooling. So really, it varies a lot by industry and by client. But I think that the really important part of that is that clients are really now putting data management at the heart of their cloud journey. And there's a lot of frameworks that Capco have helped develop, like the Cloud Data Management Capabilities Framework of EDM Council, which are helping our clients in achieving that.
Yeah, Antoine, you're in the thick of that, so I'd love your opinion there.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with what Joe said. So when we think in terms of data modernization, we cannot not talk about cloud, and every single organization has somehow that kind of cloud strategy, if not even a multi-cloud strategy. So everybody's on that kind of migration journey, but it would be kind of naive to think that we can lift and shift an entire ecosystem on-prem into the world of cloud and expect everything to work, right? So there will be first a migration, but I think there need to be that kind of hybrid approach between technologies that will remain on premises, technologies that needs to be to be used for specific purposes. So instead of really a migration and a replacement, what we are seeing is more of a harmonization or rationalization of the different tools and technologies that we use. And to Joe's point, data governance becomes that key foundation that allows that streamlining process between different entities. So what we've seen change is, in the past, having a data governance almost as a side desk activity, something where we capture all the tables, the data quality, to something that is much more on the operation aspect now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as maybe my thoughts around that are, as it used to be silos with kind of a lot of legacy tools, so you didn't need data governance as much, but clouds maybe unlocking more users to get access, therefore data governance becomes more important. That's kind of interesting. Jeremy, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that things are changing pretty rapidly in how these organizations intend to use data. And 5-10 years ago, the scope of data that was regularly captured, regularly used by these enterprises was much smaller, more self-contained, not shifting as dramatically as quickly. The migration to the cloud and the suite of tools that enable better decision making with data, better automation of processes, the use of machine learning to completely overhaul and improve processes, and then just the breadth and depth of all the data that these organizations can capture and touch is all exploding. And so a lot of the interesting challenges are the kind of organizational models that these companies had previously, when their data was more self-contained, didn't change as rapidly, was used in a fewer set of use cases, those same models, those same approaches aren't going to scale when you're rapidly exploding all of the data and use cases. And so there's a lot of really fascinating behavioral organizational changes that are beginning to catch up with the technology.
That's interesting. Maybe I'll go back to kind of, well, maybe not back to it, but as we see kind of old projects and new projects, how we talked about data governance a little bit, but data quality as well. How are those different from kind of the legacy to the cloud, and how have you seen that in different ways? And Jeremy, I'll start with you since that's what Anomalo does, but I'd love to get Antoine and Joe's opinion there too.
Yeah, the way that data quality has typically been managed has been through rules, hard and fast constraints about the data. This column should always have formats of this type. The relationship between these columns should always be X. This value should never occur in this specific circumstance or situation. We did this at Instacart when I was there. We had thousands of these rules in production. And in a world where your data set is relatively constrained and it's not changing rapidly, that can be a reasonable approach to kind of lock down the expected structure of the data. But it doesn't really scale as you go to a cloud data warehouse or data lake environment, and now you're talking about many thousands of users, potentially tens of thousands of users dependent upon the data, and an ever-growing diverse set of data sets. It's not practical to write all of the rules. It's not practical to then maintain all of those rules. And so organizations are looking for ways of having confidence and security in the quality of their data that don't require just a massive process and people lift to be able to try to boil the ocean and write rules for every possible case. And so we're seeing companies look towards more automated approaches, approaches that might use time series models to track metrics for deviations, or even approaches that are sampling the data and using things like machine learning to detect material drift and changes in the data in a more automated way. Ultimately, humans still have to be involved. It's always going to take a human to assess changes and decide, is this problematic? Do we need to make a change? And rules are also always going to be important. Rules are how you have subject matter experts be able to express what they know about the business, about the data and the technology from first principles, how they express that and ensure that the data meets those expectations from first principles. So we're seeing more of a hybrid combination of approaches that allow for scalability in this new environment.
As well as that explainability in terms of rules and transparency. So yeah, it's really, really key to be able to bridge that gap between what is said by the data versus what is also dictated by the business user. So it's really interesting. If I can just add one thing that we've seen is really interesting as well with that rise of alternative data and all that unstructured information that we can bring in as bring additional added value to our data. That's when we think of email receipt, when we think of Amazon reviews, when we think in geospatial, weather patterns, all those kind of great data set that could add additional signal contains a lot of noise. And data quality is not just about understanding that data is correct, but it's also about how relevant that data is and actionable that data is for your key decision making. So I think data quality goes much beyond just validating a specific table, but also about enabling that relevancy of insights. Not something that can be driven by rule. Yeah,
I totally agree with that, and I think if we broaden a little bit from data quality and we look at kind of semantics of data as well, I think that one of the big differences we're seeing with our clients is really putting data management at the heart of that SDLC. Having control standards implemented, as part of any new product development. I think one of the other, interesting lenses to look at this from is when we're talking about data quality, we're typically saying, is the data fit for purpose for what people want to use it for? That's typically what we're saying. And you have data producers and you have data consumers. And a lot of the typical challenges that we've seen in large complex organizations where you have really complex data flows is producers and consumers not being able to communicate those requirements to each other and having a mismatch of expectations between producers and consumers. And I think if we look at frameworks like data products and concepts like data products, where you've got an increased focus on high quality, interoperable, accessible metadata, and seeing data quality form a part of data contracts where there's a real joined understanding and agreement between those producers and consumers of what data quality should be, I think that's really changing how we're seeing our clients drive improved data quality. So then that's a big change that is, and concepts like data mesh only add to that relevancy.
And
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, you just mentioned something. We're talking about data management, and you mentioned SDLC, right? So I think this is exactly where we are getting at as an industry, is applying the best practices of what we've done with code, but to the world of data. So continuous integration, peer review, unit testing, or whatever those kind of concepts that were in the world of software engineering are getting more and more applied in the world of data, thinking in terms of that data contract between different entities and that interoperability across different systems. I think that's really key.
And Antoine, I love that analogy. And tying back to what Joe said as well, data though is very, very different from code, right? If I have a set of unit tests and a set of code, and I run those unit tests today and I run them tomorrow, I get the exact same results, right? But data is inherently complex and chaotic and changing for exogenous reasons all of the time. And so there's a lot of inherent uncertainty and chaos in data. And so the objectives of testing data and being able to have trust in that data, but also the objectives of being able to move faster and using data to make decisions and in building data products to reduce cycle times. Those appear to be in conflict. And tools in software engineering like continuous integration and continuous testing are trying to achieve both at the same time. And so I think that's actually what we're trying to do here, is ensure that we can have trust in the data and also reduce cycle times and be able to move quicker, develop products faster, create more value with all of this data that we're collecting. And so it really does, the nature of the chaos in that data makes this a harder problem that requires new approaches.
That's great. Thank you. I went back to something we talked about when I worked at a company called Looker, where talked about data breadlines and having to stay in line and wait for people to kind of give you the data you needed, where that's no longer the case. You can kind of find what you need if you get a little bit of access and be able to do things. So I think, Joe, your comment on data contracts was really interesting. And maybe I'll go, you mentioned EDM Council and some of those things. You want to just mention what that is? Capco's a member, what it does, what kind of all that's about, because I think there's a lot of regulated companies and industries in that, and I think it'd be good for people to know what it is if they don't already.
Yeah, absolutely. So the EDM Council, the Enterprise Data Management Council, is a not-for-profit organization, an industry body essentially focused on embedding data management best practices into organizations. So to do that, they have a number of frameworks. The DCAM is one of those. That's a data capability assessment model, which essentially is a framework of data capabilities, typically used as a maturity assessment or capability assessment framework to shape foundational data management programs or to perform industry benchmarking. I think more relevant to this conversation is the CDMC, or Cloud Data Management Capabilities Framework, and that's a framework which was developed over the last couple of years. That was with representatives from major cloud providers, from global financial institutions, and also Capco provided kind of project management and development oversight of that framework as well. And essentially, the CDMC is a framework for managing data in the cloud. It composes best practices, key controls, specifications, and where we're seeing our clients really start to use the CDMC within their organizations is using the CDMC in alignment with reference cloud architectures to design those controls, processes, and procedures to manage data in the cloud. And I think what's really interesting about the CDMC is it has the weight behind it of all the major cloud providers, and we're really starting to see them embed some of those kind of CDMC capabilities, practices within their platforms, and tie that back to the business outcomes that the CDMC is trying to achieve. So it's a lot of really interesting adoption of CDMC that we're starting to see. And DCAM is a relatively mature industry framework that's been around, for some time now. But CDMC is certainly picking up traction with a lot of our clients.
Jeremy, we've talked about this before, but critical data elements is kind of part of that. How I think we had an interesting thing come up with one of our customers just on how they use Anomalo for that, but I think it would kind of maybe surprise me, but curious your thoughts on critical data elements and how they were used, and how the company can use them to kind of monitor and stay within regulatory compliance.
Yeah, ultimately, critical data elements are pieces of data that that organization is depending upon to make decisions about customers that could have either significant risk implications for the business or significant implications for the customer experience. And those critical data elements are a company might have thousands of these critical data elements that they have to ensure are of very high quality, or else there's going to be real significant consequences internally. And increasingly, there are regulatory requirements for ensuring that you can trust the contents in those critical data elements, and that the decisions that the organization's making aren't biased in substantive ways because of data quality issues inside of those CDEs. And so we have seen customers use Anomalo and more automated forms of data quality monitoring to get those critical data elements assessed as being really well covered from a data quality perspective, without having to invest a ton of time and energy and process in writing and maintaining all of the classical rules-based approaches that you would use in the past to try to kind of lock down and constrain every aspect of one of these. And in many ways, the rules they aren't even possible. And so a great example is if you think about credit scores. It's very hard to write a rule that is going to assess the distribution of the credit scores and do that in a reliable way. And yet there can be a distributional shift that can have a huge adverse effect on consumers, their ability to get credit access. And we've seen that happen with third-party vendors of credit data have data quality issues themselves that result in skewed distributions that go uncaught for months and have a really negative impact. And so it takes more sophisticated approach to make sure that doesn't happen to all of this data.
Yeah, I think with CDEs, there's a real spectrum that we see to CDEs, and it's a particularly interesting topic for a lot of our clients. A lot of how we've seen our clients scope CDEs in the past has predominantly been based on regulation or a set of critical risk reports that the organization has to manage. But we're now seeing that shift now that organizations have delivered a lot of their regulatory scope, although that scope is still growing, as to how do they now start to apply data management capabilities beyond what they have to do it on. And if we think about the cost to manage data, every CDE essentially comes with a unit cost to manage. So the more CDEs you have, the greater the cost of data management. And so being able to manage the quality of those CDEs as you have a growing scope without potentially a regulatory program that sits behind it, which is your funding vehicle, is now what we're seeing a lot of our clients try to grapple with. And being able to manage that growing scope at scale in an augmented or automated way is one of the ways in which we're seeing our clients try and tackle that. Of course, there's a process culture implication as well, but technology can really be an enabler for that.
Antoine, I wonder, with Databricks, I mean, you get a lot of feedback from customers, I'm sure, on wanting to meet some regulatory compliance or different things. How in your role do you see kind of industry input to you, and then Databricks changing kind of how they're doing things so they can better help companies do compliance and stay with those, or just do better with their data? I'm kind of curious how that feedback loop works at Databricks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we hear a lot, especially around regulatory reporting, and I love to see those kind of trends around regulatory technologies. The reason is it shouldn't have to be that hard. When we look at those kind of reports, when we look at those things that we have to comply with, I know it's complex, but in theory, it shouldn't have to be that hard. The reason it's hard is because we have to marry different technologies with different data quality from different systems, reconcile everything and aggregate according to some rules and aggregations. And it's a constant struggle between data quality and timeliness. And many organizations are facing this kind of balance of, I can run that report today, but I know the data quality will not necessarily be there, or I need to wait a week to fix all the upstream sources of information. I may have a great report, but then I miss that window. So it's a constant struggle about trying to modernize technology to guarantee both the timeliness and the reliability. So having those data standards, having those data contracts, having those industry data standards, but coupled with the simplification of your tech stack is what kind of make that shift happen. So it's really about that simplification, that lineage. We've discussed that at the beginning of that discussion around that data governance at the core, really, of that framework like this, so that when we pick up abnormal behaviors of our data, drifts, we can re-inject that and replay your entire aggregation strategy.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I think like maybe I'll go back to kind of data consumers, data producers, and building those data products. But I'm curious, Joe, you kind of mentioned data contracts there. I'm curious how Jeremy and Antoine kind of feel, though they're seeing that within companies and how that, how technology can help with that.
Yeah, I think the idea of data contracts is wonderful in many places, but you have to also recognize that any place you say I'm going to rigorously define an API and set up contracts and try to enforce those contracts, you're also slowing down innovation. In many cases, you might accelerate it if you've got great documentation and you've done it really well, but you also increase friction in being able to introduce changes and have kind of dynamic movement of data across those boundaries. And so identifying where in the organizational data model you want to declare those APIs and have rigorous contracts and enforce them is an incredibly important decision that needs to align with organizational needs and product and decision-making needs, such that you minimize the need to make changes that pierce that boundary. And I think that's very difficult to do well. I also like to think about the kind of modern data stack as not being predicated on a data warehouse. I think it's a name that we use, or even data lake, but it's a bit of a misnomer in that we really are never just storing data and then retrieving it later. I really like to think about the entire process around data as being a factory. And there is a constant enrichment, flow, and change of data and use for many different purposes and cases. And so being able to monitor the quality of the data moving through that factory, being able to assess the quality of the end product of data that's been being consumed by decision makers or used in models or automated processes is incredibly important, because it is constantly changing and it is inherently very, very complex. I liked Antoine's perspective that for regulatory reporting, you ought to be able to simplify it. But in practice, I think that there's going to remain a tremendous amount of complexity as innovation is layered on top of the ever-growing diversity of sources that are being used by these companies when they're using data for operational reasons in particular.
Great. Antoine, thoughts on data contracts as it's a hot topic lately?
Yes, no, I completely agree with what Jeremy said about creating some structure and discipline without necessarily hindering innovation. So it's having some sorts of flexibilities within some predefined boundaries. So things that we have to comply with. And I think on that data contract, what I love with that is it does not force everyone to use the same technology necessarily. It's to agree on a principle and a contract that can be interpreted across different systems, across different technologies. So I should be able to share information with a third party without necessarily having to agree on both using the exact same tech stack. That contract could be that interpreter between different technologies. A good thing to look at this is also about, again, coming back to bridging the gap between business and technologies. A contract can be defined by a more business user and can be interpreted directly into the operation world without having to rely on an engineer to recode all those rules again and again. So this is where we see really that shift of having the best of what we learned from the past about governance, about structure and discipline and contract, with the flexibility offers nowadays with technology and cloud and Python and all those great tech.
Yeah, another interesting thing that I think of, Antoine, in that narrative story is back to something you said earlier around the explainability of issues. And if you think about creating producers and consumers, who has the subject matter expertise to say, is the data good or not? Right? And there's a lot of difference in expertise there. The consumers are the ones that are ultimately dependent upon it. They see the adverse effects in their decision making or in their machine learning models. And so they may have a very different perspective of what quality of that data means than the producers, who are thinking about it in the context of the systems that are generating the data, rather than necessarily all of the end use cases. And so data quality needs to be managed kind of across that spectrum, and explainability that can kind of pierce through those boundaries and help understand, why something went wrong, and such that both teams can understand and react to it, I think is an unsolved problem in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, and I think that getting to the why of data quality issues is a big challenge for a lot of organizations. They'll have root cause analysis teams, data quality teams that are trying to unpick this. And that's, predominantly today a manual process. That's fine when you've got issues that are not hampering time critical, business critical processes. But when you've got a lot of exceptions at scale, trying to understand the root cause of those issues, with such large and diverse data sets, anything you can do that enables you to get that answer more quickly is real time and cost saved for a lot of these organizations. And it's the difference between being able to make a decision, in a timely manner, or having to make that decision too late.
Yeah, great point. I wonder if, everyone has final thoughts just on this topic or any topic to make. So yeah, Antoine, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that kind of discussion around data quality, and somehow this is intertwined with that data maturity, right? It's not just about describing our data. It's not just about being able to quantify how good or how bad that data is based on rules and based on insights, but also what should we do? What are those next steps? How do we fix it? And closing that gap back to create that much more interactive approach to something that is ever changing, something that will always continuously grow, that is data. That's not a one-off activity. That's a never-ending task. And that simplification will be key, that explainability, and then that fixing, feeding that back into what should we do, what action, what remediation should we apply to that data is critical to that data monetization.
Yeah, Joe, any final thoughts?
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think the ability to action what you see and actually do something about data quality. A lot of organizations really struggle to bridge that gap. You might have hundreds, thousands of rules running in various silos, but being able to make sense of that and understand what action you need to take, I think is vital. And when we talk about data maturity within Capco, we're always talking about data maturity, relative to the value drivers of that organization. Some organizations focus on data management more than others. Some have different drivers for focusing on data management. But I think that the trend and the theme across all of our clients is being able to do that at scale, being able to do it at scale in a way which is meaningful to the business, in a way which aligns with those organizational values, and ultimately in a way which creates that kind of virtuous circle of data quality and improvements and of data culture improvement, and more usage of data. So I absolutely agree with what Antoine's saying, and I think that for me is the next big shift we're seeing with our clients. How do they take these various silos of data management they have, bring them together, make them interoperate, and be able to tell that story to the business?
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, I love that we're having a conversation about scalability with data, and it's not actually about compute. It's not about how you distribute jobs. It's about organizations, about people, about process. And in particular, we're seeing this world where the challenges are just the volume of data and the volume and diversity of applications. and that is, two forces that are growing exponentially and creating a tremendous amount of pressure, but also a tremendous amount of opportunity. And data quality is not just about meeting regulatory requirements. It's not just about having trust in your data internally or having trust with your consumer relations or your partner relationships. It's ultimately about facilitating a reduction in cycle times for decision making, for innovation, and being more competitive on top of that tremendously valuable data asset. And so ensuring that whatever you're doing in data quality is achieving that and is scalable with respect to the people that are involved in using it. The place that I see data quality initiatives today go wrong most often is they create alert fatigue. Everyone in the organization participating in the process is getting too many alerts, and they're noisy, they're not well explained, they're not contextualized, they're not targeted. And so scaling this kind of an initiative requires new approaches and new process and thinking around how you ensure that the folks involved can really utilize it effectively, and you can get that big ROI in terms of reducing cycle times and speeding up your innovation.
That's a fantastic point. It's a behavior shift, but supported by technology, which is really, really fascinating. Yeah.
I just want to thank you all, Antoine, Joe, and Jeremy. I think the discussion was great. It's great getting you together virtually and just having this discussion, because I appreciate the time you all took, and I think lots of people will get benefit from it. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.